Avramov was a pioneering early Soviet artist. Symphony of Sirens is this manifesto statement. It's like where he's saying to the world, this is what I want to do. I've always loved the art that was produced during the early period of the revolution. Lots of early avant-garde composers talked about not seeing a distinction between noise and music. And I think Avramov was really the only one who actually put his money where his mouth was and actually didn't just try and reproduce the sounds of the city and the sounds of a new environment. He actually used the sounds themselves. It utilised enormous numbers of people. Like, I believe there was something like 20 steam trains in it, a couple of biplanes, foghorns from the entire Caspian flotilla, 2 artillery batteries, several full infantry regiments, a huge floating load of warships complete with cannons that kind of went off. All the factory sirens in the city. You know, the workers are called to the factory in the way that worshippers were called to a cathedral. He marshalled together the noises of all these different people. He also had the Red Army Choir, who were actually in it live, doing the Internationale. The choir of the Red Army would have been at least 200 people. Not to mention the crowd and everybody there and the crew on all the ships, all the military stuff. There's a sequence in it where you can hear marching soldiers firing into the air. It's an entire battalion. It's about 4 symphony orchestras. So to be able to gather together that level of enthusiasm and get people to do it is really amazing. The beautiful thing about the piece is that it's not extremely complicated. He's contrasting very simple things against each other, using ideas based in counterpoint in kind of really subtle ways. There's an absolutely beautiful bit, for example, which uses church bells and a steam engine. And it fits perfectly. You know, this is as far from improvised music as you could possibly get. He's actually sat down and worked this out incredibly carefully. There's the photographs of him like waving his flags and to try and direct different parts of the orchestra. It must have been incredibly difficult. I think what his main intention was to express the power, like this unleashed power of this new class. They did an awful lot of nocturnal demonstrations. They did them quite regularly. I think there were probably 2 reasons for that. First is to bring people together collectively and get them to work together collectively in groups, but also to scare the crap out of the bourgeoisie. When I hear this piece, I could imagine factory owners hiding in attics, terrified, absolutely terrified. Whenever intellectuals try to make something for the people, it's necessarily patronizing. And it's always based on the idea that the people are basically a bit stupid. I think these collective acts or collective works like Symphony for Sirens were almost like an excuse to bring people together. And they thought that if they did it enough, something would come from it. It's an aesthetic demonstration of a political view. It's not this thing where you've got like a supposedly intellectual class which are educating people they see as being lower than themselves to be creative. They're saying that their creative voice is already there. You're just not listening to it. I think he had a very specific, very clear vision that he wanted to express. It was almost as if he was giving the component parts to whoever would be involved in it. And that's right in line with Prolog Cult. Prolog Cult was saying, we are helping you find your voice. What you do with it is up to you. Prolog Cult was basically a huge umbrella organisation. It covered everything. If you wanted to organise a football match or a poetry reading, you had to do it under the umbrella of Prolog Cult. They received something like 60 to 70% of all arts funding, but they wanted to remain politically independent. And this was a huge sore point, also because many of the key higher level members of Prolet Cult, the main organisers, have been involved in the original provisional government that the Bolsheviks replaced. And I think I get the impression from what I've read that Lenin really kind of thought that they were almost like he was quite paranoid, and he kind of thought these people are getting in contact with the proletariat more than we are. And so he saw it as a bit of a threat. And his tastes were very conservative. You know, he liked, conservative classical music, he liked impressionist painting. Prolet Cult lasted for approximately 10 years in its original form. Then it began to be suppressed. The historical records are kind of quite contradictory because I think they were written later. So they were written when Prolet Cult fell into disfavour. So the regime wanted to show that most of their activity had been a complete waste of time. But I know that if I was 20 years old in 1923 and this was happening, it would have been more exciting than punk. You can hear it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can really hear the enthusiasm, it's incredible. And they were making a new world.
Сзади-то ты помнишь, но большевики не велят назад вертаться. Что трудности прошли, это не напоминай.
The wonderful feeling of that the bourgeois are out, they're finished, you know? Really fantastic. So I think a lot of their activities probably went down very, very well. What's interesting about the piece is that it actually follows, well, he didn't use the word symphony just as an expression, it actually follows the same system that classical symphonies are organised. So you get like a statement, a diversion, statement, diversion, statement, diversion. So it's in quite clear little chunks, you know, so we divided up the different chunks and analysed each chunk individually and worked out how we were going to make the sounds. Some sounds we had to sample, but I've tried to keep the samples as minimal as possible. The other stuff, we worked out ways to add it live. I learned a lot about counterpoint and how very, very minimal sounds, very simple sounds, can be contrasted in really interesting ways and still have a massive presence in a space. Music is the act of dominating space, really. It's spatial. And he's really good at that. Like Avramov's ability to kind of use very subtle things and very simple things. And the work they made is so radical, it's incredible. You know, and it's still inspiring people today. None of his musical work has actually been recorded or written down. There's no records. After Symphony of Sirens, he just seems to have disappeared into a black hole. There are photographs of him performing, doing things. For example, he worked a lot with harmoniums and pianos, and he worked with multiple keyboards. And he built these kind of weird little wire extensions onto his fingers to increase the number of notes that he could play. And he also jammed things into the strings, like John Cage prepared piano. So they probably would have sounded a bit like Cage's pieces for prepared piano. Avramov also worked in the burgeoning Soviet film industry, and he was hired as a technical consultant on early attempts to synchronize film with sound. Again, not a lot of that survives because his suggestions were so radical that when the senior Communist Party people actually heard it, they were going, what is this? You know, you can't do this is crazy. And so I'm sure it would have sounded absolutely wonderful. He should be prized much more, for example, than the experiments that the futurists did with music. It lacks the bad faith that the other experiments had. It has so much more power. There's a distinction between two different kinds of political art. There are some forms which are political in content. There are others which are political in form. A lot of socialist realists believe that art which is political in content is the better one. That's the one that has all the songs and the propaganda pieces and like let's lynch the landlord and all that kind of stuff and waving red flags around. I believe that works which are political in form are more genuinely radical because they involve people coming into it. And it's the presence, you know, of the people that comes across so strongly. You know, that mental image of we are here now. It's like it's saying this is a new world and we own it. It belongs to us. the sound of the hammer is supposed to reproduce the sound of one of the big massive cannons on board the ship. It's a demonstration of firepower, you know, just as much as a Red Square demonstration is. They were dominating the streets and saying to the bourgeois, watch your step. That's really, I love that, it's really fantastic. There's a real kind of like nobility and a righteousness in it. It's an extremely powerful thing, really beautiful thing. I like the Russian constructivists because they try to get rid of this idea of the kind of solitary bourgeois intellectual. There's a quote, "The artist of our age will no longer be an isolated bourgeois individualist, but will be a healthy worker operating in a collectivist society." And that's what that piece says to me.